"Let my mother go and I'll put you on your feet," said the 12-year-old boy, his firm voice echoing through the courtroom like a shot in the silence. Judge William Carter, paraplegic for 8 years after a car accident, stopped leafing through the documents and looked up in disbelief. Kevin Washington's impossible promise crossed the room like a bomb about to explode. Laughter immediately erupted. The prosecutors exchanged mocking glances. Reporters whispered among themselves, as if they were watching a cheap comedy. "That kid has lost his mind," murmured a woman in the gallery, shaking her head. "Poor thing, poverty makes children unstable." Kevin Washington was there because his mother, Deborah, was facing false charges of embezzlement. She had worked as a janitor in the courthouse for 15 years, knew every corner of that building, every face, every secret whispered in the hallways. The accusation was simple. $50,000 had disappeared from the administrative safe, and the poor black woman was the obvious suspect. The boy was only 12, but his eyes carried a disturbing maturity. While everyone laughed at his impossible promise, he calmly observed each person in the room, memorizing faces, cataloguing reactions. He was not a desperate boy, begging for mercy. He was someone who had seen enough of the world's cruelty to know exactly what he was doing. "Boy," Judge Carter said sharply, "this is a serious court, not a circus. Your mother is guilty and will be convicted. There are no miracles here." More laughter echoed through the room. Kevin didn't look away for a second. "I know who stole the money," he said quietly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "And I know how to prove it." The courtroom was silent for a few seconds before the laughter returned even louder. "Then speak up, Sherlock Holmes from the suburbs," someone shouted from the back. Kevin smiled for the first time, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "First, you release my mother, then I'll show you how you'll walk again." While everyone mocked the child who dared to challenge the system, no one noticed the small digital recorder hidden in his school backpack. No one noticed how his eyes were fixed specifically on the judge's assistant, Thomas Mitchell, who had stopped laughing abruptly when Kevin mentioned knowing who stole the money. And definitely no one imagined that this 12-year-old boy had spent the last 6 months secretly investigating every person in that courtroom. If you are enjoying this story of courage and justice, don't forget to subscribe to the channel because what this boy was about to reveal would forever change the lives of everyone in that room. Judge Carter banged his gavel with excessive force, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot. "Silence. This court will not tolerate this kind of circus." His cold eyes fixed on Kevin with a contempt reserved for those he considers inferior. "Boy, your mother is guilty of embezzlement. $50,000 disappeared from the administrative safe, and she had full access. Case closed." Kevin remained motionless, but his mind was working like a computer processing data. He watched as Thomas Mitchell, the judge's assistant, fidgeted nervously with his fingers on the table whenever money was mentioned. He noticed how the man avoided looking directly at Deborah Washington, his mother, who was crying silently in the dock. "My mother has worked here for 15 years without a single complaint," Kevin said, his voice cutting through the tense air. "Why would she steal now?" The prosecutor, Mr. Davidson, laughed dismissively. "Because you always steal when you have the opportunity. It's in your nature." The racist remark exploded through the room like a bomb. Some of those present shifted uncomfortably, but no one protested. Kevin felt the familiar burning of injustice rising in his chest. The same he had felt since he was 8 years old when the police searched his home for drugs that never existed, or when teachers assumed he cheated because boys like him couldn't be naturally intelligent. Deborah Washington worked 3 jobs to support her son on her own. She was a janitor at the courthouse during the day, cleaned offices at night, and worked weekends at a laundromat. Kevin grew up practically on his own, but that made him observant, analytical, able to read people and situations with a precision that was disturbing for someone his age. "Your Honor," said the defense attorney, clearly intimidated. "I would like to request more time to denied." Carter cut him off. "The evidence is clear. Deborah Washington had access, opportunity, and motive. Poverty is always motive enough." More malicious laughter from the gallery. Kevin watched Thomas Mitchell more closely. The man wore a new Rolex, too expensive for a court clerk's salary. His nails were perfectly manicured, and he drove a BMW that Kevin had seen in the parking lot. Details that a 12-year-old boy from the suburb shouldn't notice, but that someone accustomed to observing injustice learned to catalogue automatically. "What do you have to say in your defense?" Carter asked Deborah, his voice laden with contempt. I've never stolen anything in my life," she murmured through her tears. "I work honestly to support my son." "Honestly," Davidson laughed. "A black single janitor. Interesting definition of honesty." Kevin clenched his fists. At 12, he had already learned that the system was not designed for people like them. He grew up watching his mother being humiliated, belittled, treated as invisible, or suspicious. But he also grew up watching, listening to conversations they thought he didn't understand, memorizing faces and patterns of behavior. "My mother didn't steal that money," Kevin said again, this time louder. "And I can prove it." The courtroom erupted in even more cruel laughter. "Sure you can, kid," someone shouted. "With what evidence?" "Your childish drawings." Thomas Mitchell stopped fidgeting with his fingers. For a split second, his eyes met Kevin's, and the boy saw something that confirmed his suspicions. Fear. Pure, genuine fear. It wasn't the fear of being unjustly accused, but the terror of someone with hidden secrets who realizes that someone else may be finding out. Judge Carter leaned forward, his face contorted into a cruel expression. "Pathetic boy. Do you think you can come here with your childish fantasies and change reality? Your mother is a thief, and you are the son of a thief. Accept it and save us all some time." Kevin took a deep breath and smiled again. That smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Are you sure you want to continue with this?" "Because when I prove my mother is innocent, you'll have to fulfill your part of the agreement." "What agreement?" Carter growled. "I'll make you walk again. Remember?" The room fell silent for a few seconds before the laughter returned, but Thomas Mitchell wasn't laughing. He stared at Kevin as if he were seeing a ghost. His hands now visibly shaking on the polished wooden table. Each new humiliation only fueled something silent growing inside Kevin. A cold determination that his oppressors couldn't see. What those privileged people didn't know was that each act of contempt was writing its own sentence of defeat. And a 12-year-old boy was about to teach them all that underestimating someone because of their color or origin is always a fatal mistake. The cruel laughter continued to echo through the courtroom when Kevin did something no one expected. He smiled. Not the smile of an intimidated child, but something calculated, almost too adult for a 12-year-old boy. "Okay," he said calmly. "I'll prove my mother is innocent first. Then you'll have to keep your word about walking again." Judge Carter banged his gavel violently. "Enough of this nonsense. Guard, remove this kid from here before I charge him with contempt." But Kevin didn't move. 6 months, he said, his voice cutting through the noise. That's how long I spent investigating every person in this courtroom. Thomas Mitchell stopped breathing for a second. What had been mere nervousness had now turned into visible panic. His hands were shaking so badly that he had to hide them under the table. Kevin looked directly at him and continued, 6 months watching, listening, taking notes. You think kids are invisible, right? That we don't understand adult conversations. It was at that moment that a firm voice echoed from the back of the room. The boy is right. Everyone turned to see a black woman, of about 45, wearing an impeccable business suit, walking determinedly down the center aisle. Attorney Patricia Williams, New York Bar Association, she announced, showing her card. I am here to represent the Washington family. Prosecutor Davidson's face pad. Patricia Williams was not just any lawyer. She was nationally famous for exposing judicial corruption schemes, and had a 97% win rate in cases of racial injustice. How did you hear about this case? Davidson stammered. A very smart little boy called me 3 weeks ago, Patricia replied, winking at Kevin. Kevin had found Patricia's phone number in an online search for lawyers specializing in discrimination cases. It took him a week to work up the courage to call, but when he finally explained the situation and mentioned his suspicions about the real culprit, Patricia was intrigued. Show me your evidence, she had said over the phone. For the past 3 weeks, Kevin and Patricia had been working in secret. The boy had become an unlikely spy, using his invisible status to map every suspicious movement in the courtroom. He discovered that Thomas Mitchell frequented an expensive casino every Friday, drove a BMW that was too new for his salary, and had recently purchased a $300,000 house with cash. Your Honor, Patricia said firmly. I formally request the reopening of the investigation into the theft of $50,000. I have substantial evidence pointing to the real culprit. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Carter banged his gavel furiously. Denied. This case has already been decided. Actually, Patricia continued relentlessly, federal law allows me to present new evidence if there is reasonable suspicion of judicial error based on racial prejudice. She opened her briefcase and pulled out an official document. Here is the order from the federal prosecutor's office authorizing a full investigation. Thomas Mitchell tried to discreetly get up from the table, but Kevin pointed at him. Mr. Mitchell, don't you want to stay and listen? After all, working so closely with the judge, you must be curious about who really stole that money. Mitchell's eyes widened in absolute terror. Patricia smiled predatorily. Funny you should mention that, Kevin. Mr. Mitchell, could you explain how you managed to buy a $300,000 house last month? Your annual salary is $45,000, according to our records. The silence that followed was deafening. Kevin watched every reaction in the room. He saw Davidson nervously shuffling papers, Carter clenching the arms of his wheelchair until his knuckles turned white, and Mitchell looking as if he were about to faint. During 6 months of silent observation, the boy had catalogued every gesture, every suspicious glance, every conversation interrupted when someone approached. You know what's most interesting, Kevin continued. Now with the full attention of the room, I know the combination to the safe. My mother told me because she trusts me and I know that only 3 people have access. My mother, the judge, and Mr. Mitchell. His words fell like bombs in the absolute silence. Patricia opened another folder. Kevin, show them what you found out about the security cameras. The boy took a deep breath. For weeks, he had noticed something that the adults had completely ignored. The cameras in the vault hallway had blind spots, but the parking lot camera perfectly captured anyone entering and leaving the building at unauthorized times. "Mr. Mitchell," Kevin said, looking directly into the terrified man's eyes. "Do you remember the night of March 15th? It was a Friday after hours. The cameras show you returning to the building at 11:47 p.m. Thomas Mitchell stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. "I need to go to the bathroom." But two federal agents appeared at the front door at that very moment. Patricia had anticipated this reaction. "Mr. Mitchell," said one of the agents, "we need to talk about your recent financial activities." The look of panic on Mitchell's face confirmed everything Kevin had suspected during months of patient observation. As Mitchell was escorted out under everyone's shocked gaze, Kevin turned to Judge Carter, who now looked like a completely different man. Small, frightened, confronted with the irrefutable proof that he had convicted an innocent woman. "Do you still think my mother stole the money?" Kevin asked calmly. For a moment, as all eyes turned to the judge, awaiting a response, something extraordinary began to happen in the room. It wasn't justice being served. It was the power of truth revealed by someone everyone had completely underestimated, proving that intelligence and determination know no age, color, or social class. And that sometimes adults need to learn from children what it really means to fight for what is right. Judge Carter watched Thomas Mitchell being escorted away by federal agents. And for the first time in 8 years, something other than paralysis left him completely immobile. Reality was crumbling around him like a house of cards. And at the center of it all was a 12-year-old boy he had completely underestimated. "It's not over yet," Kevin said calmly, his eyes fixed on the judge. Patricia Williams opened a third folder, bulkier than the previous ones. "Kevin, show him what else you found." The boy took a deep breath and pulled a small old laptop out of his school backpack, connecting it to the courtroom sound system. "Over the past 6 months," Kevin began, his voice echoing clearly through the silent room, "I recorded everything. Every conversation, every racist comment, every joke about my mother when you thought no one was listening." Carter's blood ran cold. The first recording began to play. The unmistakable voice of Prosecutor Davidson echoed through the speakers. "Blacks always steal when they get the chance. It's in their nature." Immediately followed by Carter's knowing laugh. "Exactly. That's why you don't even need to investigate much. We already know the outcome." The room exploded in shocked murmurs. Reporters rose like beasts smelling blood. Cameras flashing. Davidson tried to stand up to protest, but Patricia gestured for him to remain seated. "There's more," she said with a predatory smile. Kevin clicked on the next file. Carter's voice filled the courtroom. "These black cases are always the same. Guilty until proven innocent. Saves the court time." More knowing laughter from Davidson and other officials, especially single black women. "They always make up excuses." Carter's face was now completely red. He tried to speak, but Kevin continued relentlessly. "This one is from last week. A new recording. That kid thinks he can come here and play lawyer. Housekeeper's son trying to be smart. I'll show him his place." Each word was a stab at Carter's reputation. The audience, which hours earlier had laughed at the pretentious kid, now looked at him with horror and disgust. Patricia seized the moment. "These recordings have already been sent to the National Council of Magistrates," the national press, and the FBI. That was taken out of context. Carter stammered desperately. Private conversation. Kevin smiled with the same calm he had maintained throughout context. Do you want me to play the recording where you said you were going to teach that arrogant black family a lesson? Davidson tried to hide behind papers, but Kevin had material on him, too. Mr. Davidson, do you remember when you said that these blacks need to learn to stay in their place, otherwise society will fall apart? It was on April 3 at 2:37 p.m. I have the exact date. The destruction was systematic and brutal. 6 months of meticulous planning were unfolding like a symphony of justice. Kevin had documented not only conversations, but also behaviors, biased decisions, and a clear pattern of institutional racism that was now exposed for the whole world to see. Patricia stood solemnly. Your Honor, based on this evidence of systematic racial bias and unethical conduct, I formally request not only the complete acquit of Deborah Washington, but also the opening of a federal investigation against this court for civil rights violations. It was at that moment that something extraordinary happened. As Carter tried to process the magnitude of his downfall, a strange sensation ran through his legs. First a tingling, then a pressure. The extreme stress, the adrenaline, the shock, something was awakening in his nervous system. Kevin watched closely, and for the first time, his serious expression softened. Your Honor, he said quietly. Are you feeling something different? Carter looked down, incredulous. His toes moved inside his shoes, a movement he hadn't felt in 8 years. The room fell silent. Doctors would later say that rare cases of psychosomatic paralysis can reverse under extreme stress. Others would call it coincidence. But at that moment, as Carter slowly moved his legs for the first time in nearly a decade, everyone understood that they were witnessing something impossible. I said I would make you walk, Kevin murmured. But I didn't say it would be the way you expected. Carter tried to stand up. His trembling legs responding after years of immobility. When he finally managed to stand, leaning on the table, it was not a moment of celebration. It was the physical symbol of his complete humiliation. Standing before a courtroom filled with cameras, Carter now had to face not only the loss of his career and reputation, but also the realization that he had been completely defeated by a child he had considered inferior. Kevin had fulfilled his impossible promise, but at a price Carter could never have imagined. Deborah Washington wept with relief in Patricia Williams' arms. Kevin watched everything with the same calm he had shown from the beginning. Not with arrogance, but with the serenity of someone who knew that justice when it comes completely. The 12-year-old boy had taught grown men a lesson they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. Underestimating someone because of the color of their skin or social background is always a fatal mistake. As the cameras recorded Carter taking his first steps in 8 years, steps that would lead him straight out of the judiciary and into social ostracism, a silent truth echoed through the room. Sometimes justice needs small hands and big hearts to manifest itself. And when that happens, even the impossible does not remain impossible for long. 6 months later, the courtroom where it all happened was unrecognizable. Judge William Carter had resigned the day after the events. His racist recordings played on every news channel in the country. His ability to walk again became a cruel irony. Now he could move, but he had nowhere to go. No law firm would take him. His reputation permanently destroyed. Thomas Mitchell was sentenced to 8 years in prison for embezzlement and money laundering. During the federal investigation, they discovered that he had stolen more than $200,000 over 3 years, financing a gambling addiction that consumed his life. The BMW was confiscated, the house auctioned off, and his wife publicly filed for divorce, claiming she could no longer look at him without feeling disgust. Prosecutor Davidson faced disciplinary proceedings from the Bar Association. Recordings of his racist comments became study material in law schools as an example of institutional bias. He lost his license to practice law and was forced to move to another state, where he now works as an insurance salesman, avoiding eye contact with black customers out of sheer embarrassment. Kevin Washington, on the other hand, became a national sensation. His story was told in documentaries, television programs, and motivational speeches. Prestigious universities offered him full scholarships for when he finished high school. By the age of 12, he had already received offers to write a book about his experience. "What impresses me most," Patricia Williams said in a national interview, "is that Kevin never acted out of revenge. He acted out of justice. There is a fundamental difference between destroying someone out of anger and exposing the truth to protect other innocent people." The lawyer had become Kevin's mentor, teaching him about civil rights and legal strategies. Deborah Washington was promoted to administrative supervisor of the new court that replaced the previous one. Her story of perseverance and integrity made her a symbol of resistance. "I worked in that place for 15 years, she said in her inauguration speech, being treated as invisible. "Today, my son has taught me that visibility is not something that is given to us. It is something we take when we stand up for what is right." The most profound transformation took place in the city's own judicial system. Kevin's recordings forced a complete overhaul of hiring and supervision processes. Security cameras with audio were installed in all courts, and mandatory training on racial bias became a requirement for all employees. Kevin created a YouTube channel called Justice at 12 where he teaches other children about their rights and how to document injustices. "Don't wait until you grow up to fight for what's right," he said in his videos. "Injustice has no age, so neither should the fight against it." A year after the events, Kevin was being interviewed on the country's main television network. "How did you know you could prove your mother's innocence?" asked the host. Kevin smiled, the same calm smile he had maintained throughout the trial. "I didn't know if I could, but I knew I had to try. My mother taught me that when you see injustice, you have two choices. Accept it or fight it. Accepting it was never an option." The interviewer asked the question everyone wanted to ask. "What about making the judge walk again? How do you explain that?" Kevin thought for a moment before answering. "Sometimes the body responds when the soul is confronted with the truth." Judge Carter lived so long believing his own lies that the shock of reality released something that was trapped inside him. It wasn't magic. It was consequence. William Carter watched the interview from his small rented apartment far away from everything and everyone. His legs worked perfectly now, but his life was ruined. He had gained the ability to walk, but lost everything worth walking for. The irony was not lost on him. A 12-year-old boy had fulfilled an impossible promise, but the price of this cure was more devastating than any physical paralysis. The real lesson of Kevin Washington's story was not only in his victory, but in how he achieved it. Not through violence, shouting, or despair, but through patience, intelligence, and an unshakable faith in justice. He proved that age does not determine wisdom, that skin color does not define ability, and that sometimes the most powerful people underestimate those who carry true power. Today, Kevin is 15 years old and attends one of the best private schools in the country on a full scholarship. His mother bought her own home with the money she received in compensation for moral damages. Patricia Williams continues to be his mentor, and together they have helped dozens of families who have been victims of racial injustice. Thomas Mitchell is serving his sentence in a federal prison where other inmates learned about his story through the news. Being known as the man who robbed and framed an innocent black woman has not made him popular among the prison population. Davidson sells insurance in a small town, avoiding any conversation about his legal past. And Carter, he walks alone through the streets of a city where no one knows him, carrying the weight of knowing that he was defeated by a child he considered inferior. Every step he takes is a reminder that his cure cost him his soul, his dignity, and his reason for living. Kevin Washington's story became legendary not because he made the impossible happen, but because he proved that true strength lies not in the position you hold, but in the courage to fight for the truth when everyone around you chooses the comfortable lie. He taught the world that justice is not a privilege reserved for the powerful. It is a right that belongs to anyone brave enough to demand it. If this story of courage, intelligence, and justice has touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because in a world where injustice seems to win every day, we need to remember that sometimes a small heart and a brilliant mind are all it takes to move mountains and make giants walk to their own defeat.